Hello and welcome to the Motherhood Village podcast. I'm on with a very, very special guest. I have Coach Zach Kasabo, who is a certified school counselor and a parent coach with over 8 years of working with kids from grades kindergarten to 12th. His mission is to help parents confidently manage their child's challenging behaviors. He lives outside of Philly with his wife and son. Welcome, Coach Zach. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk to you.
Yes, me too. Okay. I always ask my guests to name their favorite book or one that has made a great impact. I think the more we know, the resources to share. So yeah, and you could be more than one, but if there's a book
Yeah.
that's made an impact or one that you think parents or anyone should read.
Okay. So I have two, and when I think about that question, I just think personally, and the first this isn't necessarily parent related at all, but I think of The Stranger by Albert Camus. It's a philosophy book, and I don't want to get too much into a tangent because it's not related to our discussion, but it makes you think. The protagonist is really indifferent with some significant events, and it was just the reason that comes to mind is because it was really impactful for me. But with regard to parents, strongly suggest the book Boundaries by John Townsend and Henry Cloud. It's just packed with lots of practical information.
I love
So
it.
that'd be my
I know,
suggestion.
and I love when people give suggestions that aren't just parenting books or a
Yeah,
conversation. I mean, I was listening to something and they were like, you need like other things than just to if you're a parent and you want to dive into parenting books or as yourself, if you're a teacher and a behavior specialist. And of course, we want the personal development, but there's something to say to get inspiration from elsewhere, or even if it's a fiction book. Like I love diving into and just spending a couple of days reading a fiction book just to kind of decompress, right? We
yeah,
need those moments.
yes,
Okay, so you're a certified school counselor and parent coach.
correct.
Talk to me about how that kind of started. I know you, and we were just talking kind of offline, you built this, I would imagine like awesome community online that I'm sure you never expected. But kind of talk to me about like what that journey has been like for you. And then I'm also going to pivot and say, now that you have a son, has
Yes.
things changed now that you kind of come from like obviously the credentials and doing all the things, and now that you're a parent yourself? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, for sure. So I come from a family of educators, so that I think that is how I ended up in the school counselor realm. But before I reached that particular point, I graduated with a bachelor's in psychology, and with that, as most listeners know, there's not much you can do with it. I worked at a placement for adjudicated youth. So then, and one day at that placement was more eye-opening. I learned more from one day working at that placement than I did uh, throughout my whole 4-year career, my undergrad career. But that experience also quickly showed me that I needed to do more, or that it just wasn't sustainable just with regard to certain circumstances there. So I went back, got my master's in school counseling, and I've been doing that. I've been doing that ever since. Right now, I currently working as a K-8 school counselor. I do a little bit of preschool, but yeah, it's been great. My experience does encompass kindergarten or preschool all the way to seniors in high school. So yeah, it's been great working with all the different developmental stages, which gives me like a very like thorough sample size, and I'm able to like draw on different experiences, different things that kids are facing based on where they're at in their lives.
I love that. And how old is your son?
So he's new. He's 10 months, about to be 11
Okay.
months. Yeah, so he's a little guy. Yeah,
So
yeah,
tell me, and that's amazing. So
yeah,
tell me, like, how though has that impacted? Actually, it's going to be two questions. So it's
yeah.
going to be that, and then my follow up to that, and I can ask again if you do forget, is
Hmm.
then what made you start, or why did you feel it was important to go onto Instagram and educate and really talk about this? But let's do part one. Now you're a
For
dad,
sure.
10 months old.
Yeah,
Listen, behaviorals and things, do you find yourself, or are you like, oh, like tell me how that has been since you do come with that wealth of knowledge?
yeah. So I think definitely the biggest, I don't know, shock's the word, would just be the exhaustion. Like there's no getting around it. It's inevitable. It's a different kind of exhaustion though, because with my experience, I worked with extremely challenging behaviors. So I'm used to being mentally and physically exhausted and having to endure, it's a full school day of kids just straight like verbal, physical assaults. Like that almost is like, I guess it's a different kind of experience. But I'm definitely interested just to see as he grows up, if what that looks like, reconciling my professional experience with my personal experience. So yeah, I guess the big thing would just be like the physical exhaustion of just there's no really breaks till he goes to bed, and even then it's just you're kind it's like I'm in bed at that point too most nights. So
And I think also before you go answer the second question,
yeah,
I think you make a good point because I think when you're in your career, when you're in your job and helping, you can
hmm
come home and turn it off.
right,
But when you're a parent, you now have that exhaustion, right? From
hmm
your day job, from all the things,
yeah,
but you cannot stop being a father, right?
can't
And to
stop.
me,
Yep.
I think that brings so much more mental capacity, especially I would imagine in your place, even someone like me who has talked to so many people. So I feel like I know better, so I should do better. And I'm like, oh, I know I should take a break. I know I should talk to him. That takes a lot of work. So to your
Yep.
point, I think the exhaustion because you're getting it now from 10, now it's from everywhere.
Yeah. And one little caveat I would add to what you said is that I don't want to say like should people can do whatever they want. We should be turning it off after work. I know a lot of educators, unfortunately, and this plagued me for my first few years, where like you get home from work and there's this idea that you can save every kid, and that's like going on in the back of your mind. But yes, I'm definitely at a point now in my career where I look forward to turning it off, is what I should say. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Okay,
yeah.
so you have this wealth of knowledge. Now
hmm
let's go back to the conversation at hand. So I will say, and I'll preface this to my listeners, I wanted to reach out to Coach Zach, Coach Kasabo, and he'll talk all about his how you can connect with him at the end. But I felt it was important to reach out because I love the content that he shares. So now, Coach,
Thank
to
you.
you, what made you take it to Instagram? What was it that you were seeing that you said, okay, I need to really talk about these challenging behaviors? Like, talk to me about why it was so important to start that. And then we'll go into kind of like the work that you do and giving some tips and tricks for my parents. But yeah, talk to me about what was the initial like precipice behind starting it and why you felt it was like, okay, this is what we're going to talk about.
For sure. So one thing that educators are obviously I don't that's a very generalized statement that a lot of educators are experiencing right now is that we're seeing these things, these behaviors and these trends every day, and we feel a lot of pressure to keep quiet about it. And we're all aware of it, like the educators, the administrators, but it's just like this, it's like a taboo thing now to be able just to say like this is a problem, like what are we doing about the problem? So, a big impetus for getting on social media is having a space to do that where I'm not under, my employer. Now, I do work in a I recently changed schools, and I do feel a little more open talking now, but at the time, it just I didn't feel as though I would necessarily have the support. Now there's lots of great administrators who understand, but even they feel pressured. Like there's like this huge top down mentality as far as like what you can and can't say. So I think to answer just to sum up what you just said, just having this space and like just being attached to me and not necessarily attached to my school, just having that freedom in that regard. And then also, I realized that I developed just from having to be so intuitive and on the fly with managing so many challenging behaviors at once. I realized last year in particular that I had this skill set, like this unique skill set, and I just figured it was time to try to leverage it with my own business. And part of that strategy was also sharing what I learned with other people to hopefully inspire them and equip them with some of the things that I learned.
So you said something, and I love that. I think you're basically listen. I started this with the notion that education is key. Once I became a mom, come from the corporate space, I was like, yes, I'm going to go back to work. Yes, I'm going to be that great employee. And then I became a
hmm
mom, and I was like, oh, so I'm with you. And then understanding that I think education is just at the foundation of everything. And obviously, you're an educator, but also
hmm
you're now educating parents. So talk to me about what some of those challenging behaviors are that you're seeing, that some of your colleagues are seeing. My son just started kindergarten, so I'm at that level.
Okay.
And I was like, wow, why didn't someone tell me that this is going to be a whole other slew of just things that we now have to deal with, right? Because now he's connected with other kids and other
hmm
households might not run the same way. So
Yep.
talk to me about what are some of the challenging behaviors that you're seeing and what are some misconceptions about these challenging behaviors? Talk to me about that.
So I would say, definitely for older kids, the impact of technology. and social media, and how that's so it just monopolizes so much of their attention, and it spills over into throughout the school day. And I've talked a lot about how drama from group chats is just so pervasive. And it definitely, like, if I were a teen, I wouldn't be able to manage that, and be able to, if I were in that position. But I would just say, more globally speaking, the two things that are on the rise are lower frustration tolerance. So kids tending to get, like, kind of give up on themselves too soon, when I know from experience that the rule is that kids are resilient. That's not the exception. But just the way in which some things are going right now, kids just, and this does not describe every child. It's just a trend. It just seems like there's slower frustration tolerance, and then also just this generalized anxiety, which I think is directly linked to the lower frustration tolerance, where there's this idea that, I don't have agency over my life, or I can't, if an obstacle comes up, I don't believe that I can come up with solutions to effectively overcome them. So I would say those are the lower frustration tolerance and the generalized anxiety are the two that I've noticed. There's been a steady rise over the past few years.
And it's interesting that you say that. I will tell you why I think. And since my
Hmm.
son is older than yours slightly, like I even see it. My son is 6, and my son has shown signs of anxiety maybe when he was 3 or 4. And
Hmm.
I am not a mom that's just saying that. Again, I've talked to experts, right? So
Hmm.
I'm like, wait a minute, that sounds like my child. To me, I think it's the instant gratification. I think it's the iPads they get into. I think the
Hmm.
cartoons that they're watching, everything is like color. They know that mommy and daddy can order from Amazon. My son knows he can ask Alexa for the answer. He does not
Yeah.
have to
Right.
wait,
Right. Right.
right?
Right. Right.
So
Right. Yeah.
are you seeing that correlation as well?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Yes. So I mean, frustration tolerance, it's synonymous with immediate gratification, like, either the immediate or the delayed gratification. So you're absolutely right. So that's one thing that parents, current parents have to navigate, is things are just on demand. And there are some like, with regard to getting answers to things. And I think part of the conversation shouldn't just be, well, they shouldn't have access to those things, or I don't think elimination is necessarily the answer. It's more so, how do we teach responsible use of these things, so that it doesn't create this low frustration tolerance. Yeah. Yeah.
I agree. And I think actually was going to ask you that. I was talking to someone on the podcast. I don't remember their name now, slipped me. But yeah, it was in essence, we were talking about similar and saying that, like it's here. Like
Right.
social
Right.
media
Right.
is here,
It's here.
phones are
Yep.
here, like we're in it, right? But I think to your point, I think what has hurt is that because I think also now parents are so inundated and parents are so stressed, it is
Mm-hmm.
easier to say, put an iPad in their face as opposed to taking a moment as well to say, okay, like I'm already recognizing these signs. Like I noticed it in my son early, but again, I have access. Even if no one listens to my podcast, I've talked to so many people. So I know instinctually over time, like I'm like, okay, I see the signs. Let me reel it back in. I know
Right.
what to look for, but I'm one in how many. Parents are just trying to pay the bills and do what they have to do. To me,
Hmm.
that's what's scary, but that's why what you do, what I do in these conversations are so important so that if we can plant that seed, to your
Right.
point, it's not going away, but how do we do it responsibly? How do we notice
Yeah.
the signs?
Mm.
And now I'm going to go to you, unless you have a follow up for that, but I have something to go with your coaching. But go ahead.
So I think, as a society, we're going to circle back to some of these principles we know to be true, just like moderation, and structure, and just really, some of these things that are very authoritative in nature, that we know the authoritative parenting style works. Like, it's been around forever. Essentially the parent leads, but while also making sure that the child is understood and respected and taken care of. But ultimately, the parent leads. Like, the parent is the one being decisive. And
Sure.
we can talk more about this. I just recently posted a video about this, that conscious, gentle, respectful parenting, whatever adjective you want to use, offers so many valuable concepts and ideas that have absolutely transformed the parent-child relationship for the better. The issue is how it's been talked about and how it's been delivered.
I
So
saw that.
so a lot of people aren't, they're interpreting. I noticed for a fact, from my private coaching business, and from the messages I get, a lot of people aren't hearing the explicit message that there's no circumventing or getting around tantrums, like they're inevitable. There's no like within limits. There's no getting around putting your child in frustrating situations. Like it's part of life. So a lot of parents are from the things that they hear from, especially from the more significant influencers, it's implied that you can just connect your child into success. Like if you just connect, you know, and really what I was thinking some more about this, and I was empathizing with the parents who are struggling with the misinterpretation is I think they're seeing tantrums as if they're not connecting enough. So it's almost like if my child's having a tantrum, that means I didn't connect enough. So then they're trying to process and connect more without realizing that approach is unintentionally enabling the negative behavior.
Oh my God, that is so true because in essence, what you're saying is like then it's almost like a catch 20. Like it's almost
Yes.
like a double-edged sword because they're like, I'm
Hmm.
trying to connect, but it's not connecting because they're still having a tantrum. So now they're down on themselves, and it's like this like never-ending circle.
It's like a
And it's so
vortex.
poignant. And I'm
Yeah.
glad, actually, I'm glad we're on this because I agree. I do think, I think to your point, there are the ways that it's talked about, there's so many misconceptions about it that we think, yes, their child is just going to listen and do if we connect. And I
Right.
think to me, what they're missing the point is I'm not doing it for that. I'm doing it more so that as my child gets older, we will hopefully have a connection so that when
Yes.
there are outside factors that he knows we're this safe space. I'm trying to hopefully build tools in him so when he gets older, but I know the tantrum's going to come. I know
Yes.
all of that's going to be there. But to your point, I think a lot of parents, because if they're just watching this one video and they're stuck on this, they're thinking, oh, I'm going to gentle parent, I'm going to either give in or I'm going to talk, and then all is going to be well. And that's
Yeah.
far from it. They're still
Yep.
human beings.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, 100%. And just piggybacking off of that, another thing that has just been standing out to me is that I think a lot of these popular influencers, it's more of like a lifestyle thing than more so of like a technical, like this is what you do in X. When X happens, you do Y. It's more of like this lofty lifestyle of my kid was upset and I connected with them, and then there's always like resolve at the end of the video, and then everything was fine. It's like, hold on a second, like, and like, I don't want to be a hypocrite. I sometimes, I'm sure my videos can come across as like, if you just do this, and just to clear that up for all your listeners, absolutely not. I'm providing a tool that you can
Yes.
add to your toolbox that you can try, and a lot of it's trial and error.
It
You know,
is. And I think that's a good point for anyone listening because, again, coming from a mother of a child who's already showing signs of anxiousness, but also showing signs of giftedness, which I've now
mm,
realized brings a whole set of challenges. They feel
yep,
more highly sensitive, like all of these
yep,
terms,
hmm,
like I see it already. All I can do is grab the tools. This is just grabbing tools in the toolbox. It's
yep,
not, I think in parenthood, if anything, like you just know it's just a never ending circle. But
hmm,
ultimately, I think it goes back to mom and dad being good so that they can go back to these tools to help their
yes,
kids manage this, right? Because if
yes.
mom and dad are good, if mom and dad are not stressed, if mom and dad are in a good space themselves, they can model the behavior because ultimately we can listen to you, we can listen to all the things, but if we're not modeling the behavior, it really doesn't matter.
100%. Yes. 100%. Kids, we learn by watching. Like we imitate what we see. We internalize those behaviors. Like, yes, there's a time and a place for the language, but
Yes,
one thing that people obsess about online is like they just want a script for everything. It's like I'll post a video, they'll be like, "Where are the scripts?" And sometimes I'll give like a little snippet, but it's like that I think, and I'll take responsibility for that, like suggesting that's to reiterate what you said. It's at 100% like what's being modeled. And one thing that I've routinely seen that's in both as a school counselor and in my private coaching business is that lots of times parents they come to me and they want us to focus just on the child to solve the problem, when it's like, no, this is not going to be a thing until you fix you and your relationship, like your relationship. Like having these split expectations, and not unwilling to compromise with each other. Like with it, like I can absolutely coach you through some things, but chances are, until that gets resolved, you know.
it
Right.
it's going to be there's still going to be a never ending behavior
Yep.
because I mean, I know for me, I mean, this is a perfect segue into the strong-willed kids
Yeah,
because you
for
you
sure.
posted some videos. My son is a strong-willed kid, like
Hmm.
through and through. Like I said, I can give you the list of all the characteristics, and then we could go into he's a Scorpio. I'm Puerto Rican and Sicilian. My husband's from
Yeah,
the Caribbean, so like he's
yeah,
got this temperament. Like
yeah,
he's a strong-willed kid through and through. But let's talk about that because I know it's something that you're
yeah.
passionate about, and I think it does
Hmm.
go hand in hand with this though, because when you are dealing again with the just I only have my son to really go off of. Yeah, they remind you about your stuff. My son has
Yeah.
no problem to face that mirror back to me and he's like, "Whoa," to call me out. And he's only 6. So let's talk about that. Is it an inherent nature with strong-willed kids? I just gave you a list of things that at old
Hmm.
school would be like, "Oh yeah, he's going to be strong-willed." You hear the redheads, the this, the that.
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
it
yeah,
something
yeah.
that's inherent nature? Do kids become strong-willed? Is it something they developed? Is strong-willed being good or bad? Talk to me about strong-willed kids and why you're kind of passionate about that.
Yeah, so that's like my bread and butter. That is primarily, when the things that I share, the skills and strategies that I developed and now sharing on social media, almost always almost primarily comes from working with strong-willed kids, especially like oppositional defiant kids. But with regard to like how's it developed, this is completely based off my experience. I think it's like there's an inherent some of it is inherent, but it's exacerbated based on the environment. So either the people, their surroundings, the people will either do things that make it more intense or help to manage it. So that's generally been my experience. And one thing to keep in mind about strong-willed kids is that there's this connotation. There can be this negative connotation that it's like this bad thing, when in reality, when you don't want to condition the will out of a strong-willed child, like that's going to be their superpower someday. They're going to be when they get the support that they need and the guidance and the structure from their loved ones, like that's gonna take them places. Being strongly convicted, not being easily moved, not being as impressionable. That's gonna be a lifeline for them as they get older.
For my parents listening, what do you think they should know apart from that? Because I totally agree. I don't want to diminish my son's light with that because I do
Yeah.
think that it will serve him. You know, he has no problem telling
Hmm.
no. He lives in his conviction.
Right.
But in it, when you're like, you have to do this, and he's
Right.
like,
Right.
no, you're like, okay. So it's again, I have to make sure I'm regulated to talk with him. It all goes back to me too. But what are some other things you want parents to know of that it might be in the thick of it with their strong-willed kids? And then the part B to that are what are maybe some practical strategies? I know you give a plethora of videos on your social media, but for
Hmm.
those, just to offer some practical strategies of how parents can maybe address them. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so I use a term called mutual submission. I don't want to get too convoluted with this, but here's the bottom line is that if you want your strong-willed child to cooperate, you have to model cooperation. Just like we talked about before, how the model is almost always the most important piece to what behaviors get integrated with the child. So when I say mutual submission, it typically looks like this. The parent has an expectation, they allow some grace with how the child meets the expectation. So they're surrendering this idea of like, you're going to do exactly what I say when I say. It never ever means that you give up the expectation. Like you maintain expectation. You might just give them a little more time to process instead of getting into a power struggle. You might give some choices. It just depends. So that's what the parent is surrendering on their end. So that's how they're modeling cooperation. On the child's end, they surrender when this is done enough times, they surrender total defiance. So they surrender this idea that I can say no all the time. So they might say no in the beginning, but eventually, as they process the situation, they work through it, they meet that parent's expectation. So again, surrendering control, like if just think about it, if you have to surrender control, if you expect your child to surrender some control too. Yeah.
Does that go hand in hand with also making sure you're setting um I know you did something on boundaries and I love the video. I meant to take notes from that. Talk to me about that. They go hand in hand, don't they? Of like making sure you're setting the expectation, you're setting the boundary, all of that.
Mhm. 100%. So one thing that I want to clear up that I'm responsible for this as well is that I've been talking about boundaries as if it's synonymous with an expectation. So a boundary is basically it's like guardrails for your expectation. So the expectation is the child needs to clean their room. The boundary is like, okay, how much wiggle room do I give them to support them in meeting that expectation? So and how I the way in which I encourage my clients and families I work with in schools to set and maintain boundaries is you make the expectation clear, you give a reasonable amount of opportunities for the child to redirect the child, so for them to self-correct, and then you apply consequence when warranted. So again, instead of like immediately I snap my fingers, you have to meet this expectation. It's okay. I see my child's overwhelmed. This is difficult. I'll give him two, maybe three opportunities before I let them know what that consequence is going to be. But again, if we zoom out, the way in which, when executed correctly, why that's effective for strong-willed kids is because you are giving some grace, you're giving some freedom with the way that in which they meet the expectation.
Well, I think a lot of times, and we can talk about society and how
Yeah.
we expect to parent, millennial parenting, and all the things. I
Hmm.
always, when I'm talking to my moms in my mom group, because it's like I talk to my son like I would anyone else. He's a little human being in the sense of like meeting their expectation, and
Hmm.
I take it back to being in the corporate setting and being a manager and how I would want to be talked to. Or if I was managing a team, would I really be like, you got to get up this right this second and do it? Or would you be
Hmm.
like, all right, when you have a moment, let me know, but having the communication, right? Like I always take it back to that because I'm like, in the real world, how would you feel if your boss snapped his fingers and was like, yo, coach Zach, I need you now? And you're like, all right, can you give me a second? You might be a little perturbed, right? You might be a little
Hmm.
like, hey, but if he was like, hey, when you have a moment, let me know. Now, if he came two or three times and
Right.
you didn't do it. So I'm like, that's what we do in the real world. So why is it why? It's like parents have this innate thing. And I think, listen, I'm sure if we brought in the therapist and I've talked to plenty, it's like, well, it goes back to childhood and how we were
Hmm.
raised in the old school. When I say you do, you ask how high. When I say jump, you don't ask back. And I think
Yeah.
we had that innate thing. But right, it's like if you bring it down to like your workplace or how you would want your friends or anyone else to talk to you, you would want some kind of grace with it too. What if you had excuse my language, like a shitty day and you were like,
Right.
give me a moment, I
Right.
try and be aware of that.
Yes. Yeah. So I love that. I love that example with relating it to the workplace. And I think the key point that just needs to be solidified was the other part you said, which is okay, if we do it two or three times, now it's like you do need to, there is no more excuses. Like you need to do it now. So I think that's the balance that we need to achieve is that you give opportunity, but you also if their child or in the workplace, if the person isn't responding, then you set a stricter limit. And that goes into also where a lot of this unintentional enabling is coming from. Is it's sometimes it's either too much in one of the directions. So it could be too heavy on the limits or too heavy on the empathy part.
Yeah. Or too much
Yeah.
of the like, okay, let me know, or you give
Yeah.
in. And then there's no
Right.
consistency with like, listen, I gave you two or three times. Like now you got to get it together.
Right.
And actually, you made a good point. So I want to go into that. You've talked a lot about, and I've seen in your videos about how society is unintentionally enabling these behaviors.
Hmm.
What do you mean by that? And again, how can we maybe save it, flip it? What are things that parents can maybe, if they recognize this happening, talk to me about that?
Yes. You mentioned the old school parenting. If you jump like how high. So we've done an outstanding job recognizing past mistakes with parenting styles, past parenting styles, and how generally speaking it was pretty dismissive. Does not matter how you're feeling. Here's the expectation. Meet it. Don't want to hear about it. We've countered that with the opposite, which is over empathizing and going back to the beginning part of our conversation, which is connecting to a fault and not realizing, not paying attention. Okay, now it's time to disengage. Set the limit and let my child endure the frustration so they can build the competency. So we're doing this huge pendulum swinging back and forth, and my hope is that we'll center ourselves eventually. But I think it's just going to be whoever's monopolizing the media and whoever has the most clout on social media. So right now it's heavy in the empathy. Maybe at some point it goes heavy in the other direction with with being dismissive. But the bottom line is that when parenting or working with kids, you want to provide empathy and limits. So you just want to make sure it's a balance. Sometimes some situations might call for more empathy, and some situations might call for more limits. But the reason why it's important to try to incorporate both empathy and limits is because empathy lets the child know that you're emotionally available, so it provides that connection. And then the limit helps the child build skills. So it puts the child in a situation where they have to develop skills. And I've talked about this before. Those are the two key ingredients to a child becoming securely attached is when they can count on someone to be emotionally available and when they can count on themselves to be competent. So secure attachment essentially is the child feels confident to explore on their own, so they feel competent, and they also believe that when they mess up, that there's someone that they can go home to that will take them seriously. That will take their experience and their feelings seriously.
Yeah. And I love that. I love how you said the pendulum swing because I think the unfortunate part about the social media is that even if you are listening to, let's say, just one parenting coach that maybe is a little heavy on the empathy,
Hmm.
but then if your algorithm shows all of that, then all you're going to see is empathy, empathy, which
Yeah.
then you start programming empathy, empathy without seeing the
Yes.
other pendulum. So although there may be a little bit of everything, if it's the algorithm that then shows you all the empathy, so now you're stuck thinking, because I've even had that. And there are sometimes I'm like, oh my goodness, because I'm always looking out for new coaches. Who can I talk to? Who,
Hmm.
what are things that, who can I have a great conversation with? And I'll start seeing, and I'm like, goodness gracious. So to your point, though, that's what makes it difficult because then if you do have some of these parenting coaches or, whatever, speaking on this, but they don't also show the other side because I do agree. And again, I've seen and talked to get the full scope of like, oh, I need to be empathetic. And I have these conversations with my husband because he's a little bit more old school in the approach and truthfully has come in to help me and sometimes been like, listen, this is going to be great for him. Like, think about it in that way. And I also, like, the mama bear in me is like, wants to protect him. And then my
Hmm.
husband comes with some like, all right, well, let's make sure this is going to build stuff. But then I also come like, okay, but we need the empathy. So there's a shift with it, but you need that full scope. And I think that's where
Yes.
we get into danger because if some of these, like you said, some of these influencers, and regardless of what maybe their intent may be, which is another reason why I tell my moms, I don't care who you follow, me, who or whatever, take it with a grain of salt. Like
Yes.
nobody is
Yes.
like take it with a grain of salt. Nothing is perfect.
Hmm.
And for every good video they're showing you, there's also in the background of me being like, I had a day, my son and I weren't, whatever. Like it is what it is. So take it with a grain of salt. But I think you made such a good point of like, the pendulum switches, so it goes back and forth. But you
Hmm.
cannot. And for my listeners listening, from the full scope of having so many conversations, you cannot have one without the other,
Yes.
because life is about limits. And I think if you just only show the empathy, you also set them up for a lot of disappointment of them thinking like life is just like, oh, everyone's going to empathize with me. And that is not the case. You're going to hear no, it's not going to go your way. And we need that. That's how you build resilience.
Yeah, absolutely. And with what we talked about in the beginning, what are some things that I'm seeing in schools, and I know other educators agree with this, with the rise of this generalized anxiety. A lot of that comes from the over empathizing and this idea that, mom or dad, they take the time to always check in with me about my feelings. And when I'm upset, they'll sit and we'll talk about it. And when even if I'm not necessarily on my best behavior, if I'm overwhelmed, they'll make sure like they'll check in with me and they'll try to process. And then they don't receive the same feedback from a teacher or a peer, and all of a sudden it's just it doesn't sit well with them. So with regard to attachment style, that's how a lot of kids develop anxious attachment styles, is that if they don't get enough limits and they don't have faith in themselves, they start to feel anxious about other people.
And then when you tie in though, like you were saying, and then it's like the social media, and then it's the this, and then you
Mhm.
wonder why parents sometimes could be a little like checking in because
Yeah.
listen, this new age wave of parenting, it is difficult. I had Tatiana Jordan. I don't know if you're familiar with Bark Technologies, but it's this technology that are trying to help parents have like a safer online experience. So they're
Okay.
up to date with all the like Snapchat and lingos and really helping parents understand like what can go on if you give your child a cell phone and making sure that
Mhm.
they just know the dangers of online. And, one of the things she said so eloquently was like, no other, like this parenting, it's just, we're in a very, very, very interesting season of parenthood, and there is nothing obviously been like it before, and
Mhm.
we'll see what comes after. But with the exposure of so many things and parents being so worried, parents having anxiousness, right? Because of the mom groups and the information,
Yes.
parents are overwhelmed. And I just saw a study that said like kids tend to be more anxious and depression from the household that they come in. So if parents
Mhm.
are showing signs of anxiousness and depression, it's going to follow to the kids. So then it's like this smorgasbord of just like everyone's anxious and depressed and the parents. And I'm like, holy hell, like it is. It's a lot to be parenting. Are you doing right? Are you parenting? Or are you not parenting enough? Are you checking in? Are you not checking in
Yes.
enough? When do you give them a cell phone? But everyone else has a cell phone. It's crazy.
It's wild. And one thing that I really encourage my clients in particular and families that I work with through schools is to trust your gut, like trust your parent gut. And obviously sometimes it's not always going to be spot on, but just in general with these things like, should I allow my child to have a screen right now? Or, should I allow them access to that privilege when they just we're extremely disrespectful or, like trust your parent gut. Like again, you and I have been mentioning with taking the things you hear online with a grain of salt. Like I got a lot of backlash over a particular story I posted recently, and then you know I followed up. I forget my exact language, but it was something like you should. First of all, nothing online is individualized advice. So like let's just hard pause right there, like hard stop. Like everything you say, it's not some of these messages I get, it's like, but not my child. I'm like, I'm not speaking directly to you or your child. This is like things that I've learned that I'm sharing. And the language I used was it's a good jumping off point. Like you hear or read about something or see something like, okay, think about it, maybe do some more research, maybe try, maybe don't. That's that you use at your own personal discretion. It's not, you know, we're not giving tailored advice for how to manage your individual child.
But I think that goes to kind of what we've been saying is like the kids are inundated with social media and access, and so are the parents, which is
Hmm.
why I don't have a Facebook group. I all of my stuff is on a WhatsApp chat. We meet in person. We have support groups so that we can openly talk. I tell my moms don't share any TikTok videos, like because they can get lost in the sauce. I want to make sure that whoever we are sharing are people that are giving like at least sound advice, and that my
Yes.
moms are aware that, to your point, that it's not tailored to you and that every
Yes.
child is different, and still talk with your doctor. But I think that is the problem, is that not only are kids exposed, but the parents are exposed as well. And I think they take it personally if you're saying this and this, and they're like, but wait, not my kid. And you're
Hmm.
like, no, 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 no. I'm saying generalization, that if you have a child that might be experiencing or showing some of these characteristics, try this, see if
Right.
it works.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yes. So before we part, because I want people to be able to connect with you, but there was something here I
Hmm.
saw, and you also mentioned it about the effective communication. If
Yeah.
and you've mentioned it a couple times, then how do you, in your experience in dealing with, especially with kids with maybe some of these more challenging behaviors or strong-willed kids, in
Hmm.
your experience, in your opinion, what are some ways that you think can be effective communication that
Yeah.
can maybe have without causing the resentment? Because you mentioned a point of saying you're checking in too much. What do you think is a good fine line to kind of have there and to check in? Talk to me about some of that language.
Yeah. So I'll if just with regard to effective communication. Yeah. So I think first and foremost, it's important just to accept that you and your child aren't always going to be in this harmonious state. Like there's going to be, you know, various fears cause parents to avoid confrontation and to avoid addressing their child. And a big one is fear of disapproval. And it can be extremely toxic because then basically you're setting this precedent that if I don't always have my child's approval, then I'm not doing, then I'm not doing my job correctly. So there's going to be times where your child doesn't like you. Like it is what it's part of the package. It's inevitable. So just accepting that there's no way around that. And then a couple more concrete strategies. One would be, when possible, to avoid over explaining. So it totally depends on the child. Again, you are the expert of your child, but sometimes over explaining, what it does, it signals to the child that you're not really sure of your position. So it's not the best approach with regard to defending a boundary. And it also, the more you explain, sometimes your child will get stuck on the validity of of like the facts than the boundary itself. So and that's where the negotiations happen. That's where the wiggle room happens, and all of a sudden it's no longer about the boundary. It's about like it's about the facts, or the debate. So I just posted on my story today a quick way to boost your confidence with your kid. Again, when warranted, it depends on the circumstances. Is just to try to cut it in half. Like whatever you say, just try to do your best to cut it in half. Something else, another very practical strategy that I found to be effective, especially when confronting your child, is to lead with responsibility. Just to model for them, first of all, taking responsibility. So just going back to the theme about modeling, if you expect your child to take responsibility, they need a model to show what that looks like. But also, when you do that, it also takes some of the pressure off of them, and it lets them know that like you're willing to look at yourself too, because you can get, at some point you're definitely they're gonna challenge you and say, well, what about this, or you did that. So it's important to be able to, and you know there's ways you can handle those deflections, but ultimately within reason, you do want to lead, when possible, lead the conversation by taking responsibility. Clearly I messed up, or I didn't do a good job at explaining this, because
Yeah.
we're still having this problem. And then another thing too would just be to try to be really intentional with how many opportunities you're giving. You-
Mm.
you're choosing to interact with your child before you disengage. So there's other strategies, but with regard to effective communication and resentment, I know, I was going to say, this goes back to not over explaining. Like let the structure do the teaching, instead of always trying to let your logic do the teaching. So structure your boundaries, expectations, systems, schedules, routines, consequences. Like let those try your best to influence your child's behavior through the structure. It's going to be a heck of a lot easier, especially when they become teens and preteens, and they can start to think more logically, and they're going to have all sorts of comebacks. So you just empathize, and then you just remind them of the structure. Like, I hear you, this is overwhelming, but 8 o'clock is bedtime, instead of 8 o'clock's bedtime, because if you don't, you're gonna wake up all tired, you're gonna be grumpy and this and that.
Yes. And
Yeah.
you know what? You saying that, I was nodding my head because I recognize, again, I've tried all the different things, and I did
Yeah.
that with my son early on, of like over explaining. And then he got, like I said, my son is 6 and he's been talking, and like I've been dealing with this since he's 4. And I was like, wait a minute. Like, and to your point, I've seen some of that to where the over explaining then kind of takes away. And then he actually challenges and he's like, well, no, that's not true because of this. And I'm like, hold up. Like, I'm the parent. So then I stopped, right? And then
Right,
I was like,
right,
no, no,
right.
no, no, no. Like I had to course correct because I'm like, wait, I'm over explaining too much. And then to your point about the systems, my husband's big on that. And him and I, we're trying to find that beautiful balance of it, because I think there is something to say, because to your point, again, it's always just setting them up for like life success. I
Hmm.
talked to a gentleman on my podcast. He does like life skills here in South Florida. And I was like, goodness, the life skills that you're teaching are life skills adults need to have. And he's like, well, it kind of goes from the beginning. How can you expect your kids to have these life skills if you're not helping them understand like 1 and 1 is 2, but not just in addition, but to your point that there's structure, there's processes, and
Hmm.
you can't do this without doing this. Like there's a thing with it. And it resonated with me because I'm like, oh, that's so true. But I think again, in parenthood, we get so overwhelmed. So we also want instantaneous. We want them to
Yeah.
listen. We want them to just do, without understanding that I think parenthood is like it's a marathon, it's not a sprint, and we have to really work.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
want you to share, how can people connect with you? How can people follow you? How can people work with you before we part ways here?
Yeah, for sure. So you can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Coach Kasabo, and on Facebook you can just search Kasabo Behavior Management. And then you can also connect with me and see the services I offer and see if we make a good fit to work together by going to coachkasabo.com.
I always ask my guests to kind of have some final thoughts. And I always say that guests always like, really after having this conversation, like jokingly, but yeah, like if someone had to listen to this and they're like,
Yes.
okay, tell me, how would you sum it up?
Yeah. So I think part of my calling with this whole with the social media and my business is to inspire a an honest conversation about how we've done a great job correcting some mistakes from the past with regard to how adults treated kids, but how we also have a huge blind spot right now with the way in which that we're parenting and treating kids with the over empathy. So it's my hope that from having conversations like the one we just had, we can inspire more people to meet in the middle. So make sure the child feels heard, but the child also has limits. So that's my mission.
Love it. I think it was a great conversation. Thank you so much for your time, for sharing some awesome nuggets for a wonderful conversation, and continued blessings to you for love and light. Thank you.